What's up guys, back with a quick Borderlands video, and today I wanted to talk about some recent Borderlands 3 news that unfolded over the past couple of days concerning microtransactions and the possibility of microtransaction loot boxes being in Borderlands 3. And while you've probably heard from various other sources already, I figured I could go ahead and give you guys some of my thoughts and opinions on the matter. But I guess without further ado, let's go ahead and discuss what prompted this entire concern in the first place. So for those of you that don't know, Take-Two Interactive CEO Strauss Zelnick recently made a statement that pretty much confirms that many of their future titles will incorporate microtransactions. And specifically, Zelnick is quoted by Gamasutra as saying the following: "The business, once upon a time, was a big, chunky opportunity to engage for tens of hours, or perhaps 100 hours. That has turned into ongoing engagement, day after day, week after week. You fall in love with these titles, and they become a part of your daily life." Zelnick then goes on to say that, quote, "We've said that we aim to have recurrent consumer spending opportunities for every title that we put out at this company. It may not always be an online model, it probably won't always be a virtual currency model, but there will be some ability to engage in an ongoing basis with our titles after release across the board." So basically, what Take-Two's CEO Strauss Zelnick is saying here is that they're going to set up some kind of recurrent consumer spending opportunity for all future titles. And basically, this is corporate speak for microtransactions without really saying microtransactions. Now, if you've watched this channel for any length of time, you probably already know this, but Take-Two is the parent company for Rockstar and 2K Games, and 2K Games just so happens to be Gearbox's publisher for the Borderlands franchise. And because of that, a lot of people in the Borderlands community, both on Reddit, YouTube, and other social media sites, are understandably concerned about there being some form of microtransactions in Borderlands 3. Now, it's unclear whether someone tweeted Randy Pitchford directly about this, or if Randy wanted to go ahead and address the concern of Borderlands 3 microtransactions himself, but Randy released a series of 12 tweets discussing microtransactions, loot boxes, and the monetization of content in future Gearbox games. Now, I'm not going to quote all 12 tweets here, but I will summarize it for you as I understand it. Randy basically said that he is very much against predatory monetization schemes in free-to-play games, as well as premium AAA titles. He goes on to mention that there was, quote, customer demand to sell golden keys as microtransactions, but as we all know, golden keys were instead given away for both Borderlands 2 and the pre-sequel via social media. He then goes on to say that he supports DLC in almost any form, as he feels that new content that took energy to create deserves to be compensated. Randy then goes on to mention that he objects to some of the arguments and language being used to fight against the predatory monetization schemes that he says he's not a fan of. Particularly, Randy doesn't seem to like the term loot box when it's used to refer to microtransaction loot boxes that you see in a lot of different games like Overwatch, Call of Duty, or Star Wars Battlefront 2. Now, this may be because it's sort of synonymous with Borderlands loot chests, and Randy wishes there was another term for it. And I think that's understandable. In the last several tweets, Randy talks about how he has an issue with an argument that is along the lines of, quote, grinding sucks, and I shouldn't have to pay to avoid grinding. To this, Randy says to simply not play the game if you don't want to grind, or if you don't want to pay money to skip the grind. He then says if the grinding is the game and the game isn't fun, the rational choice is to play other games that are fun. Ultimately, it seems like a lot of the reception to Randy's tweets have been very positive, particularly because he came after microtransactions that seem to be creeping up in a lot of our favorite games. Though, I would like to give you guys some of my thoughts on what Randy has said, in addition to what I think about the prospect of having microtransactions in Borderlands 3. Now, when it comes to what Randy has said, a lot of it sounds really good. It's nice to know that he, along with Gearbox Software, generally tend to be against the idea of predatory monetization schemes like buying in-game currencies and quite possibly microtransaction loot boxes. And to Randy and Gearbox's credit, the vast majority of the games that they have put out have what I would consider to be very fair monetization systems. Arguably, Borderlands 2 was the best in this regard, as it was a very complete game to begin with, and most of the add-on DLC was pretty good. Granted, some of the guns and weapons that were added weren't particularly great, but even in the case of something like Sir Hammerlock's Big Game Hunt DLC, it was a pretty substantial add-on, all things considered. And while it is true that Borderlands 2 does have microtransaction skins, provided that you purchase the Handsome Collection edition of the game, you can get all of them for free, along with all of the other DLC. And even while microtransactions were added in Battleborn's primary business model was also pretty fair. Basically, you paid $60 for the game, and an additional $20 got you the season pass that added some more stuff. With all of this said, I don't think there is really any other way to refer to Overwatch, Call of Duty, or Star Wars Battlefront 2's microtransaction system as anything other than loot boxes. All of these games potentially put the player in a situation where they are witnessing a crate, box, chest, or some other type of storage device open to reveal random items. And again, while I get why Randy Pitchford doesn't want them to be referred to as microtransaction loot boxes, I'm not sure what else you could call it. What I am concerned with is the last couple of tweets where Randy sort of alludes or talks about the idea of paying to avoid the grind. Now, maybe I'm interpreting these last couple of tweets wrong, and you can feel free to mention that in the comments below, but it seems like what Randy was saying was that if you don't want to grind, or if you don't want to pay to skip the grind, then you should play another game. Now, traditionally, Borderlands has always been about the grind. Part of the rewarding feeling you get while playing Borderlands is the struggle to acquire awesome guns. And some people like myself really like the grind, and the quest to obtain the perfect gun in a Borderlands game is very fulfilling. However, for other people, it's a big turnoff, and they simply don't like it, and they just go ahead and play something else. I guess what I'm trying to say is that the issue that I have with what Randy said, provided I'm interpreting it correctly, is that microtransaction loot box systems are grindy by their very nature. And perhaps a great example would be supply drops from Call of Duty Black Ops 3. What Activision and Treyarch did was they set up a system to where you could quote-unquote grind for crypto keys and buy supply drops that way. However, what they preferred you to do was pay real-world money to obtain COD points and then buy supply drops that way. If you are familiar with the supply drops in Black Ops 3, they started off just being cosmetic at first. However, over time, Activision started to include specific guns that could only be obtained through the supply drops. And this was really sinister because you could spend 2,000 COD points and not even get the gun that you wanted because you were either getting these random camos for guns that you don't even use, or you would get these random melee weapons that were all pretty much identical in terms of stats. Basically, Treyarch and Activision added all of these frivolous items to Black Ops 3 to make it more difficult to obtain the guns you wanted, thus potentially getting you to spend more money on COD points, and by extension, increasing profits for Activision. As it pertains to Borderlands, what if a series of new weapons were announced, however, they were only available from this specific chest that could only be opened using a resource that takes forever to grind for, or could be only opened using a currency that you have to pay real-world money for? Sort of like how supply drops work in Black Ops 3 and all of the new Call of Duty games. Now, to be fair, Randy does seem to be against the idea of purchasing in-game currencies like COD points from the Call of Duty series. However, my concern at that point would be that microtransactions could affect your progression somehow. For example, maybe you could spend some real-world money to help you level up faster, or maybe you could spend money to increase your drop rate for legendaries. That way, you could potentially pay to skip some of the grind. My hope is that if Borderlands 3 does end up having microtransactions, which it's looking like it very well might, I just hope that the microtransactions are more like Borderlands 2's, where you can simply buy heads and skins. And granted, while it still sucks that you still have to pay for cosmetic items, these items didn't necessarily affect progression of the game. And depending on what version of the game that you owned, they might eventually end up being included for free. And that would be pretty awesome. As far as the question of whether Borderlands 3 will have microtransaction loot boxes or not, I think if the developers over at Gearbox are smart, they won't include them. After all, having an RNG system over the already established loot system will probably piss a lot of people off, especially if the microtransaction loot boxes include specific guns, just like we've seen with Call of Duty. I think this would also have the unintentional side effect of people simply not buying the DLCs. After all, the big draw of buying the DLCs is that you get certain guns and weapons, and if you're no longer going to get those certain guns and weapons, and they're only available through this quasi-supply drop system, then why even buy the DLC? Ultimately, I don't think we will have to worry about microtransaction loot boxes for Borderlands 3. However, what I think we will probably need to watch out for is whether microtransactions will affect in-game progression or not. For example, maybe what Gearbox might try to do is they might try to sell you the Moxie's Endowment Relic, and maybe it provides this insane XP boost, and you have to pay like $2, $3, $4, maybe $5 for it. At the end of the day, it's really hard to say with all of this. Again, my hope is that there will definitely not be microtransaction loot boxes, and again, I don't think they're necessarily going to happen. However, I do think we will see microtransactions, which is going to suck because I'd just rather have mod support. But alright guys, I think that's going to pretty much wrap up this particular video. If you liked this video, feel free to leave a like and let me know what you think about all of this. Honestly, I am not really looking forward to microtransactions because this may mean that there is no mod support for Borderlands 3, but again, I guess we're just going to have to see what happens. Otherwise, like this video if you liked it, click the bell to join the notification squad, and as always, take care, and I'll see y'all next time.